In this video, we will be talking about loops. Loops refer to the part of your program and code that will be executed or repeated at least once. Loops work just like if statements. However, there's a slight difference. In if statements, if the condition was met, then your program will execute once and only once. Once the program is executed, the compiler will exit the if statement. However, in loops, if the condition is met, the code will be executed at least once. In some cases, it might be repeated several times. There are three kinds of loops: do-while, do-until, and for loops. The first type of loops is called a do-while. In a do-while loop, the condition must be true in order for your code to be executed. And while the condition is true, it will continue to be repeated. Once the condition is false, then the compiler will exit your loop. This type of loop must have what's called a counter. A counter basically is an integer variable that is tested against the condition. You must have counters, otherwise you will end up with what's called an infinite loop. An infinite loop is a loop that the exit condition is never met. Here are the steps on how this loop is actually functioning or is executed. In a do-while, you start with the condition, so you test the condition. If it is true, you continue and the compiler will execute the code. After it executes this side of the code, then it's going to add a value to the counter. And again, this value is going to be tested against the condition, and this is how we reach the exit condition. After you add a value to the counter, the compiler will reach the word loop. When the compiler sees the words loop, it's going to go back to the beginning and test the condition again. This time, we're going to be using the new variable of the counter. And we're going to test the condition again. If it continues to be true, then the compiler will execute the code again. And again, it will add another one to the counter. And we're going to test the condition again. This will continue to repeat until the counter reaches a point where the condition is false. Once that happens, then the compiler will exit your loop and this part of your code will be terminated, or the loop will be terminated. Here's a simple example of a do-while loop. The first line, I'm going to define an integer variable in order for me to have a counter. I'm going to call that integer variable int counter. The second line, I would like to show you the difference in value in int counter before and after the loop is executed. So the second line, right after defining int counter, I'm going to add the value of int counter into a list box I called lst output. And the third line, this is the part where I'm going to start my do-while loop. The condition is I want to test the value of int counter, and my exit condition is number 2. So the value of int counter must be lower than 2 in order for this condition to be true. In this case, 0 is lower than 2, which means now the compiler can actually execute the part of my do-while. The code inside the do-while is just going to display or going to add the word hi to my list box lst output. After that is done, I'm going to add +1 to my counter. So now the value in my counter is no longer 0. Now it's 1. Once the compiler sees the word loop, it's going to go back to the beginning of the do-while. And now int counter is going to be 1. So 1 is lower than 2. That is true. So now another word hi is going to be added to lst output. I'm going to add another one to int counter. So now the value in int counter is 2. 2 is not lower than 2. Since the compiler noticed that 2 is not lower than 2, it's going to exit the do-while and continue with the program. The final line in my program is I'm going to add the new value of int counter. In this case, the new value of int counter is going to be 2. So the output that the user is going to see, it's going to be 0, then 2 words high. So 0, high, high, then number 2, because these are the items that I added to my list box. End counter, then every time this do while executed, it added the word high. Then finally, I added the last value of end counter. Here's an example of an application where I already wrote the code for a do while. It is using the exact same code that I showed. The only thing I changed is the output, so to make it easier for us to see where the output is displayed from. So once I click do while, this part of the program will be executed. And as you notice, the first value of end counter is 0, and I added this part to the message. 0 is the counter value before the loop. Then, once the condition is met, or it was true, because 0 is lower than 2, it displayed the first word high, so high from inside the do while. And that was repeated twice, because we see the word high appear twice. Once the condition became false, this value was added to my list box. So 2 is the counter value after the loop.